The day my world cracked open didn't come with thunder or warning. It came quietly, like a whisper that cut deeper than any scream ever could. My wife stood in front of me, her eyes hard and cold, and said, "You're worthless. I'm taking the kids." The words didn't just hit me, they hollowed me out. I had already lost my job that morning, a place where I had given nearly a decade of my life. Walking out of that factory, I told myself I could recover. I told myself I would figure it out. But when she left, taking the laughter of my children with her, the silence that filled the house became unbearable. It wasn't just silence, it was condemnation. Proof that I had failed as a father, as a husband, as a man. For weeks, I wandered like a ghost. Days bled into nights, and nights into mornings, each one heavier than the last. Bills piled up on the kitchen table like small reminders that life moves on, even if you can't. I tried to drown the pain in distractions. TV that played to an empty room, food that had no taste, even alcohol that numbed but never healed. None of it worked. I wasn't living. I was waiting. For what? I didn't even know. But grief has a strange way of sneaking in lessons when you least expect it. Mine came in the smallest of forms, a crayon drawing I found wedged between the couch cushions. My daughter had scribbled us together, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. She had drawn me taller, smiling, with the words, "My hero," scratched in crooked letters above my head. I broke. For the first time in weeks, I let myself sob until my chest ached. Because in her eyes, I was still someone worth drawing, worth believing in. And if I couldn't live for myself, I realized I had to live for her, for both of them. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the hollow-eyed stranger I had become. And I whispered a promise, not loud, not dramatic, but desperate and honest. This isn't the end. I will rebuild. The road back was not glorious. It wasn't filled with big, cinematic moments. It was small, almost invisible steps. I started waking up early again, not because I wanted to, but because discipline was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. I found work wherever I could. Small jobs, odd tasks, things that barely paid enough but reminded me I was still capable of something. Every failure felt like another stone on my back, but slowly, steadily, the weight shifted. I began to notice things I had ignored for years. The way morning sunlight fell across the kitchen floor, the taste of simple bread after a long day's labor, the relief in hearing my children's voices on the phone, even if only for a few minutes. These fragments, stitched together, became lifelines. The turning point came one evening at a community hall, where I had reluctantly gone after a neighbor's invitation. I sat in the back, arms crossed, listening as others spoke about their struggles, lost jobs, broken marriages, battles with addiction. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone. Pain wasn't just mine, it was universal. And sharing it didn't weaken you, it freed you. That night, I stood and told my story. My voice trembled, my hands shook, but I let the truth spill out. Not polished, not pretty, just raw. When I finished, the silence in the room felt different than the silence at home. It wasn't condemnation, it was connection. People looked at me with understanding, with recognition. I walked out lighter than I had felt in months. From then on, I returned again and again. The community became my anchor. And slowly, I began to see a version of myself I thought was gone. Not flawless, not unscarred, but human. A man learning, trying, refusing to give up. And yet, the hardest part wasn't forgiving the world. It was forgiving myself. For every missed bedtime, every angry word, every moment my children had needed me and I wasn't there. Guilt clung to me like a shadow. But I learned something in those meetings. Something I carry even now. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing every day not to be defined by it. I started writing letters to my children, even when I couldn't deliver them. In those letters, I poured my heart, the things I was too ashamed to say face to face, the apologies I didn't know how to give. I told them about my mistakes, but also my hopes. I told them I wasn't perfect, but I was trying. Those letters became a mirror, reflecting the man I was becoming. The cracks in my life hadn't disappeared. But for the first time, I stopped hiding them. Because cracks aren't just signs of breaking, they're places where light can enter. That was the beginning of my redemption. Not a single day, not a single victory, but a choice repeated over and over, to rise again, even when it hurt. And it was only the start of a much longer journey. Redemption wasn't a straight climb upward. It was more like walking through a winding forest. Sometimes I found clear paths, sometimes I tripped over roots I thought I had already stepped past. Some nights the old heaviness would return, pressing down like a storm, whispering that nothing had really changed. But each morning I woke up was proof that I could keep choosing differently. The change showed itself first in the way I approached my children. They had every right to keep me at arm's length, to doubt my words. But children carry an incredible gift, the ability to forgive, even when adults fail them. I began with presence. I showed up to school events. I called just to listen, not to explain. I read bedtime stories, even if my voice cracked with emotions I couldn't fully hide. One evening, while tucking my daughter in, she said something that pierced me. "Daddy, I like when you're happy again." Simple words, but they told me everything. That she had noticed my absence before, that she had carried my silence like a weight of her own. From then on, I knew I couldn't undo the past, but I could shape her memories of the future. It wasn't only my children who reminded me of my second chance. The community that had once felt like strangers became a family of sorts. I learned to sit with people's stories, to listen instead of rushing to speak. At first, I shared my story as a way of unburdening myself. But slowly I realized others found strength in hearing it. My brokenness was no longer just mine. It was a bridge. I'll never forget meeting an elderly man named Ibrahim during one of our gatherings. His presence was quiet, almost invisible, until he finally chose to speak. His story was of wasted years, addiction, and regret. But then he looked directly at me and said words that carved themselves into my soul. "The day you fall doesn't define you. The day you decide to rise does. And every sunrise gives you that choice again." Those words became my anchor. Whenever shame tried to drag me back under, I remembered Ibrahim's voice, steady, sure, carrying the weight of someone who had lived both sides of failure. With time, opportunities opened. I began helping with small workshops for young men who felt stuck, abandoned, or angry. At first, I didn't think I had anything to offer. Who was I to guide anyone? But the truth is, people don't need polished advice. They need honesty. I stood in front of them, not as a flawless example, but as proof that mistakes don't have to be the end. And they listened, not to my successes, but to my scars. Still, not everyone believed in my change. Some looked at me with suspicion, waiting for me to fall again. And maybe in their eyes, I had earned that doubt. But I learned not to chase validation. Change isn't a performance, it's consistency. And consistency speaks for itself, louder than any defense. Years later, as my children grew, they began to ask their own questions. One night, my son sat across from me, eyes searching mine. "Dad," he asked softly, "what kept you going when everything was broken?" For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. Then I told him the truth. I didn't keep going because I was strong. I kept going because I realized weakness isn't failure. It's an invitation to lean on faith, to lean on love, to rebuild one brick at a time until the ruins begin to look like home again. He nodded slowly, tears gathering in his eyes. And I understood then that the story I once wished I could erase had become the very story my children needed. Not a tale of perfection, but of persistence. Not a father who never stumbled, but one who never stopped rising. That realization changed the way I carried my past. I no longer saw it as a stain, but as testimony. The cracks in my life weren't ugly marks to be hidden. They were places where light had entered, where resilience had been born. And so, my journey spilled outward, beyond my home, beyond my neighborhood. I began speaking to groups, writing letters, sharing in ways that reached people I would never meet face to face. Letters came back. Men thanking me for showing them they weren't alone. Women telling me they finally believed healing was possible. My scars had become seeds, planted in soil I never thought I'd touch. But the most important part wasn't the crowds or the workshops. It was the quiet moments, the silent prayers at my mother's grave, the laughter of children echoing on the street, the warmth of sunlight on a worn-out kitchen floor. These were the moments that taught me healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, reminding you that life, even in its simplest form, is still worth living. In the end, my story wasn't about a man who conquered everything. It was about a man who chose, every day, to rise, even when he stumbled. About someone who discovered that redemption isn't found in perfection, but in persistence. And if there's one truth my life has etched into me, it's this. No matter how deep the wound, no matter how heavy the regret, it's never too late to start again. The ending is still yours to write.